Throughout our lives, I think we always need some sort of media to keep us inspired. Even if it is not directly related to something we want to achieve, it's important to have shows or books or movies or whatever it might be that give you hope and help inspire you to achieve something, to do better, to make a dream reality. Space Brothers is one of those shows, starring two brothers, unsurprisingly, who both wish to go into space. When they were kids, they saw what they believed to be a UFO at night, and from that day on, they both promised that they would make it to space, to the moon, and maybe even to Mars if that was feasible by that point. Jump forward 20 years, and the younger brother, Hibito, is actually about to achieve his dream. He's going to become the first Japanese man on the moon. Mutta, the older brother, hasn't exactly followed the same path. At some point along the way, he thought his dream just wasn't attainable. He gave up and did the sensible, realistic thing and decided to pursue a career designing cars. And certainly that can be a completely fulfilling career for someone who actually wants to do it. But ultimately, this is not his calling. This is not what gives him fulfillment in his life. And that is only doubly compounded by the fact that his younger brother actually did achieve their dream. So you have this dynamic of, why couldn't I do what my brother did? Why couldn't I fulfill the promise while he could? But also, he's the older brother and he failed to do it while the younger brother succeeded. So after spending some time with his brother in the US and getting to see a little bit of what it's like to be an astronaut in training, Mutta finally decides he's going to start on the path to becoming an astronaut. The next chunk of the series focuses on him trying to actually achieve that, going through the rigorous tests and training required to determine if he can actually become an astronaut. The hope is that while doing all this training at JAXA, he will eventually get selected to go over to NASA with a small group of other candidates to potentially get into space, maybe even get to the moon. And beyond just simply following in his younger brother's footsteps, Mutta wants to go to the moon because he's hoping to fulfill the dream of someone very important to him and Hibito, that being their Aunt Sharon, who is suffering from a disease that eventually will take away her motor skills. It's sort of a race against time to get there and lay the groundwork to fulfill her dream before she's potentially not around anymore to see it. And so Mutta goes through all this training. We meet all the other candidates, some of which succeed, some of which don't. And you really do feel how hard it is for them to not be able to get through it, to not be able to achieve their dream. And the show makes everything that they go through very interesting. I don't know how many people are necessarily thinking that they want to learn all of the ins and outs of what it takes to become an astronaut, but even if you're not particularly interested in that, I think the show does a very good job of keeping everything that the characters go through engaging. It helps that a lot of the supporting characters do get fleshed out. This show has a wide cast, and many of those supporting characters do get a good amount of spotlight and backstory. So while Mutta and Hibito to a lesser extent are very much so the focus characters, the titular Space Brothers of course, the supporting cast does get a lot as well. And with nearly 100 episodes, I think it is important that more than just two characters are well defined and developed. As the show goes on and Mutta returns to America, which is where most of the show actually takes place rather than Japan, we see him continue training, meet more people involved with NASA, and step by step get closer to eventually achieving his dream of going to the moon. But along the way, we also see Hibito actually get to the moon and try to establish this moon base with the rest of the members of his team of astronauts and go through his own trials and tribulations and struggles with NASA bureaucracy. So while Mutta is definitely the main character, and this is primarily his journey of redemption, so to speak, to actually fulfill the promise that he had abandoned, whereas Hibito had not, Hibito still goes through his own struggles throughout the show. And for the most part, I think this series does make good use of its nearly 100 episodes. It's able to flesh out a large supporting cast, keep the main two characters interesting, and also make all this insight into what exactly it would take to be an astronaut and work at NASA or JAXA very enthralling, I think. Like some of the things the characters do, I would not have thought that they'd need to do. Underwater training, because that is one of the best ways they can replicate what it would be like being in space and being on the moon. I hadn't thought that, they would need to learn how to fly fighter jets. It's a lot of things that you wouldn't necessarily think that the characters would need to do if you don't already have that knowledge. So again, even if you personally don't think that learning all this stuff about NASA and becoming an astronaut would be interesting. Trust me, it is. The show makes it interesting. And a lot of that is due to the characters and how strong and well-defined they are, but also just the show is well written and is able to make all of these things the characters have to go through and all the training they have to do captivating. Seeing who is able to succeed and become a candidate to go into space and who isn't, and the other obstacles that they encounter along the way, it is very well done. What's a little bit less well done is some of the padding that the show starts to increasingly rely on as it goes on. Unfortunately, this is a series that's adapting a manga that still is not done, and this show started in 2012 and ran for about 2 years, while the manga was still ongoing, meaning it eventually ran into the trouble of getting too close to the source material. And as the show goes on, it starts to rely more and more on recap. Many episodes start to throw in a lot of previously on segments at the beginning of the episodes, and those are annoying, but you can always just fast forward through them until you get to new content. A couple minutes at the beginning of each episode is a little frustrating, but manageable. But then they also add on these Mr. Hibito segments at the end of a lot of episodes where in universe there's this cartoon depicting all of the members of Hibito's team as animals and showing them getting up to antics related to what they had to do in space. They aren't really annoying to watch, but some of them do take up a decent amount of time at the end of each episode. And also, one of the astronauts is given an animal to represent them that is questionable and insensitive, to say the least. But what really gets me is that about halfway through the show, episodes 52 to 54, if I remember correctly, are just straight up recap episodes. 3 recap episodes in a row. I remember being stunned when I was watching the series for the first time and saw that, because it just was not something I expected. And, one recap episode here and there, okay, whatever. You may not expect it to happen, but it's not going to be that frustrating to deal with. 3 in a row is nuts, especially because once you get to 3, you're like, how many are there going to be? Is there going to be more than that? 4 or 5? Thankfully not, but it is the sort of thing where once you get to that point, okay, we're going to start seeing some padding. And eventually, this resulted in the show having to stop. Not end, not conclude, just stop. And that's basically what the last episode of the show is. It's just a stop. We need to take a pause and wait for the manga to be done, which still has not happened yet. Granted, it seems to be happening soon. There actually was a report about 2 years ago that the manga would be ending shortly, and according to the creator of the manga, the anime would restart after the manga has ended. Whether that will actually happen, we still have to wait and see, but certainly it would be a good sign that this show can hopefully get a much-needed conclusion once the source material is finished. And presumably, now that there's at least 12 more years of content to go through, we really shouldn't see the sort of padding that we saw during the show's initial run. So hopefully everything will be a little tighter when that eventually comes about. So while it is unfortunate that right now we don't have a conclusion, it certainly seems like we will get one at some point. Ultimately, Space Brothers is one of those shows that I would consider an experience. And that's not just because it's long, and it is always memorable when you watch and complete a long series. But more importantly, this show is an experience because you will walk away from Space Brothers getting something out of it. Whether that be the insight into what it's like to become an astronaut, or appreciating just how strong a lot of the characters are, or at the end of the day, just feeling inspired by what Mutta and the other characters go through. Even if you don't want to become an astronaut, simply watching a show like this will hopefully help you regain some passion to achieve whatever dream it is that you have that maybe you, just like Mutta at the beginning of the series, had long since given up on. Media like this is very important to keep people inspired and passionate and make sure that they don't abandon their dreams just because they don't think it's entirely realistic. Even if you don't directly relate to what these characters are going through, I think on some fundamental level, we all can. So whether it be knowledge, admiration, or inspiration, Space Brothers has something for everyone. And I would be stunned if you watched this series and didn't get something positive out of it. Thank you so much for watching. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed. And until next time, take care, everyone. Look forward to the next video.